What if I told you that cutting someone's microphone could backfire so spectacularly that it ended a 30-year academic career in less than 60 seconds? What if I told you that cutting someone's microphone could backfire so spectacularly that it ended a 30-year academic career in less than 60 seconds? What if the person holding that power thought they were silencing a conservative voice but instead created the most viral moment in Harvard's history? And what if what happened next didn't just shock the 1,200 people in that auditorium, but changed how America sees academic freedom forever? This is the story of how one dean's attempt to silence Charlie Kirk became the mistake that destroyed everything she'd worked for. Harvard's Sanders Theater was packed beyond capacity. Charlie Kirk stood at the podium, and the atmosphere was charged with tension. Students filled every seat, faculty lined the walls, and protesters gathered outside with signs reading, "No platform for hate." Dean Patricia Whitmore, 58, Harvard's Dean of Academic Affairs for over a decade, sat in the front row with the event organizers. She had reluctantly agreed to this speaking engagement after months of student pressure, but she'd come prepared to maintain control. Charlie Kirk, 30, had spoken at hundreds of universities, but Harvard was different. This wasn't just any Ivy League school. This was the institution that had shaped presidents, Supreme Court justices, and cultural elites for centuries. As he approached the microphone, he knew every word would be scrutinized, every argument dissected. But what happened in the first 5 minutes changed everything. "Good evening, Harvard," Charlie Kirk began. "I want to start with a simple question. How many of you believe in free speech?" About half the audience raised their hands tentatively. "Interesting. Now how many of you believe hate speech should be banned?" Nearly every hand shot up. Dean Whitmore shifted uncomfortably in her seat. This wasn't going as planned. "Here's what I find fascinating," Charlie Kirk continued. "You all support free speech in theory, but the moment someone says something you disagree with, it becomes hate speech. So let me ask you this, who gets to decide what counts as hate speech?" A student in the third row shouted, "The university does. That's what administrators are for." Charlie Kirk smiled. "Perfect. So you're saying that academic administrators, people in positions of power, should determine what ideas students are allowed to hear." The room was about to witness something unprecedented. Dean Whitmore's jaw tightened. She hadn't expected this line of questioning. The student who'd shouted looked confused, suddenly realizing the trap he'd walked into. "Let me give you a real example," Charlie Kirk said, pulling out his phone. "Last month, Harvard's own student newspaper ran an editorial arguing that free speech is a tool of white supremacy. The dean's office officially endorsed this position. Dean Whitmore, since you're here tonight, would you like to defend that statement?" All eyes turned to Dean Whitmore. The cameras that had been focused on Charlie Kirk swiveled toward her. She was trapped, respond and engage in a debate she wasn't prepared for, or stay silent and look weak. She chose option 3. Dean Whitmore stood up, walked briskly to the event coordinator, and whispered something urgent. Within seconds, the coordinator was on the phone. Charlie Kirk continued speaking, unaware of what was happening. "The problem isn't that Harvard students can't think critically," he said. "It's that they've been trained not to. When was the last time any of you heard a genuine conservative perspective in your classrooms?" Then came the moment that stunned everyone. Suddenly, Charlie Kirk's microphone went dead. Complete silence. The audio system had been cut off remotely. Charlie Kirk tapped the microphone, looked confused, then looked directly at Dean Whitmore, who was now standing with her arms crossed, a satisfied expression on her face. The auditorium erupted. Students began shouting, some in support of the dean, others in outrage. "Let him speak," voices called from the balcony. "This is censorship," others yelled. Charlie Kirk stood calmly at the podium, microphone in hand, watching the chaos unfold. He didn't look angry or frustrated. He looked amused. Then he did something that nobody expected. He set the microphone down and began speaking in a loud, clear voice that somehow carried across the entire auditorium without amplification. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed, "you just witnessed something remarkable. You asked who gets to decide what counts as hate speech, and Dean Whitmore just gave you your answer." The crowd fell silent to hear what came next. "I didn't use a single slur. I didn't attack any individual. I didn't promote violence. All I did was ask questions about your own policies, and the dean decided that those questions were too dangerous for Harvard students to hear." Dean Whitmore realized she'd made a terrible mistake. Students were pulling out their phones, recording everything. Social media was already exploding with microphone gate hashtags. Charlie Kirk continued, his voice projecting perfectly. "This is what authoritarianism looks like. It doesn't come with jackboots and uniforms. It comes with polite administrators who silence inconvenient questions in the name of protecting you." A student near the front stood up. "Dean Whitmore, why did you cut his microphone? He wasn't saying anything offensive." Other students began standing, joining in. Let him finish. This is Harvard, not North Korea. We can handle hearing different opinions. But the real earthquake was just beginning. Dean Whitmore, seeing the crowd turning against her, grabbed the coordinator's microphone and tried to regain control. Mr. Kirk was violating our community standards by promoting harmful ideologies. What harmful ideology? Charlie Kirk interrupted, his voice still carrying without amplification, asking who decides what speech is acceptable, questioning whether students should hear different perspectives. Is that really what Harvard considers harmful? A professor in the balcony stood up. Dean Whitmore, I've been here for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this. You just proved his point better than he ever could have. The crowd was getting restless. Students were chanting, "Turn the mic back on." Social media was blowing up with live streams. This was becoming a public relations disaster in real time. Dean Whitmore tried again. This event is concluded. Security will escort Mr. Kirk from the premises. But Charlie Kirk wasn't done. Actually, Dean Whitmore, before I go, I have something I think everyone should know. He reached into his jacket pocket. What he pulled out changed everything. 3 weeks ago, I received this email from someone in Harvard's administration. He held up a printed document. It's from your own assistant dean, warning about my visit. Would you like me to read it? Dean Whitmore's face went white. That's private correspondence, is it? Because it was sent to me. It says, and I quote, Dean Whitmore has instructed us to find any means necessary to disrupt or cancel the Kirk event. If disruption isn't possible, we are authorized to cut audio/visual equipment if his remarks become problematic. The auditorium exploded. Students gasped. Faculty members looked shocked. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was premeditated censorship. Charlie Kirk continued reading. Under no circumstances should Kirk be allowed to complete his full remarks. The administration considers his presence a threat to Harvard's values. The room erupted like a volcano. Even liberal students were outraged. This wasn't about agreeing or disagreeing with Charlie Kirk anymore. This was about basic honesty and academic integrity. You planned this, a student shouted at Dean Whitmore. You invited him just to censor him. This is fraud, another called out. You sold tickets under false pretenses. Dean Whitmore was trapped. The email was real, the plan was exposed, and now she was facing an angry crowd of her own students and faculty. We were protecting students from harmful rhetoric, she stammered. By lying to us, a professor demanded. By planning censorship in advance, Charlie Kirk, still speaking without a microphone, delivered the final blow. Ladies and gentlemen, you came here tonight to hear dangerous ideas. Well, here's the most dangerous idea of all. You're capable of thinking for yourselves. You don't need Dean Whitmore to protect you from questions. You don't need administrators to decide what you're allowed to hear. You're Harvard students. Start acting like it. Then something unprecedented happened. The entire auditorium, liberal students, conservative students, faculty, staff, began standing and applauding, not for Charlie Kirk's politics, but for his refusal to be silenced. The applause grew louder and longer, turning into a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. Dean Whitmore, realizing she'd lost complete control, quietly slipped out a side exit. But the damage was done. Videos of the incident were already going viral. Harvard censorship was trending nationwide. The next morning, Harvard's student newspaper ran a front-page editorial condemning the administration's actions. Faculty members who had never agreed on anything released a joint statement defending academic freedom. Alumni began calling for investigations. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Within 72 hours, Dean Whitmore submitted her resignation. In her resignation letter, she wrote, I believed I was protecting our students from harmful ideas. Instead, I learned that the most harmful thing you can do to students is assume they can't handle the truth. Harvard's Board of Trustees issued an unprecedented apology to Charlie Kirk and instituted new policies protecting speaker rights. The university that had tried to silence conservative voices became a national symbol of the importance of free speech. But the real victory wasn't political, it was educational. Because Charlie Kirk didn't win by having the best arguments or the perfect talking points. He won by trusting the audience to think for themselves, even when the authorities didn't. The lesson was powerful and clear. Sometimes the most effective response to censorship isn't to fight harder, it's to let the censors expose themselves. When someone tries to silence you, stay calm, stay focused, and let their actions speak louder than your words ever could. That night at Harvard proved something that administrators, politicians, and cultural gatekeepers forget. You can cut someone's microphone, but you can't cut their message. You can silence their amplification, but you can't silence their truth. And when you try to protect people from ideas, you're really just protecting yourself from being proven wrong. If this story reminds you why free speech matters, why censorship always backfires, and why trusting people to think for themselves is the most radical idea of all, then subscribe and share this with someone who needs to remember. The truth doesn't need protection from questions, lies do. What did you think of Charlie Kirk's response to being censored? Let us know in the comments, and remember, the most dangerous thing you can do to ideas is try to silence them.